Well, hello guys, this is Brian with Cliffside Outfitters. Glad you could join us again today. Today's video is going to be one of the first in a series of videos that we hope to do on woodsmanship. As you guessed by the name, today's video is about tree identification, and not just random trees in the woods. It's going to be primarily about species that are beneficial to wildlife. And I'd like to start the video by telling you a little story. Now, this video is going to be primarily targeted toward hunters. Whether it's deer, squirrel, turkey, whatever. I'd like to tell you a little story about my experiences in hunting. I got into hunting when I was a child, and it basically was just walking through the woods and see what you see. When I first started getting serious about deer hunting, I was probably in my late teens or early 20s. The basis of my hunting was to find a good concealed location in the woods and create a bait pile. Then go out there and sit and wait for the game to come to me. And I still do some of that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing that. Years later, I started doing a little more hunting with my father-in-law. And I realized rather quickly that I could consider myself a deer hunter, but I wasn't much of a woodsman. He had a whole lot more knowledge of the woods and was a whole lot more successful chasing after the white-tailed deer on its own terms. I think in the modern era, the way deer hunting, or hunting in general, has been commercialized, and it's been propagated to a spend your money to be successful sport. Like I said, it's been commercialized to the point to where, you know, you've got to buy this and you've got to buy that. You've got to have all these gadgets and gizmos. You've got to buy food products. But from hunting with older guys that are much more experienced than me in the woods, I've realized that if you pursue white-tailed deer on their own terms, not only is it mentally more rewarding, it can be just as successful as if you're hunting over a bait pile and wasting your money throwing out corn and stuff like that. Now, like I said, this is not to criticize any style of hunting. I still hunt over corn. We use food plots. But when we go to public land and deer hunt, that stuff's not allowed. So you've got to be a little bit more of a woodsman. But anyway, I'll quit rambling. Today's video, as you may have seen in the title, is Know Your Oaks. So let's go take a look. We're going to take a little walk through the woods, and we're going to see if we can identify some of the different oak trees. And if you can identify those food sources, then that gets you one step closer to being a successful hunter as well as a successful woodsman. All right, guys. Well, we're going to start this out with probably, if you don't pick up on any other species of plant or tree in this video, I want you to concentrate on this one. The tree that I have right here behind me is probably the primary species, primary food source for the white-tailed deer in the fall. It's the white oak. Now, they tell me that years ago in the eastern part of North America that the chestnut was the primary food source, and I guess this would have been a secondary food source. But the chestnut blight wiped out all the chestnuts in our area. Now, I imagine it's probably a nationwide thing, but in the eastern United States, the chestnut, the American chestnut, now we still have Chinese chestnut around, and that's a species that has been brought over. A lot of people grow them in their yards and stuff, and they do escape into the wild, but the American chestnut is no longer around. So as far as mass, which is nuts and tree fruit, the white oak is the primary species that you'll want to take note of as far as hunting, and that goes for deer for sure, and even squirrels and other animals are drawn to this tree. This tree, the acorn that's on this tree has less tannins, which is a bitter substance in the acorn. So this is the primary nut tree for white-tailed deer. You want to know this tree for sure. So let's take a look at the white oak. If you'll notice on that tree right there, I want you to get a good look at that bark. You can probably see why they call it a white oak. It's sort of a silvery gray color, and the bark, if I can get my hand up here, the bark's relatively scaly, and it can be sort of peeled off, sort of in sheets, just like that. If you'll look, it says a sheet of the bark that come off. But especially this is not a old tree, but as you look up the tree, you can see the scaly bark, and I'll try to show you one from the bark from my older tree. It looks a little bit different, but if even the older trees, the younger limbs that's up in the tree is going to have that scaly white bark, hence the name the white oak. Now let's see if we can find a leaf. All right, guys, there it is. Now I'm going to use the backdrop of this tree. We're in the fall, but the leaves haven't turned yet. They're starting to, but there's not a whole lot of good backdrops out here for a green leaf, so I'm going to use the tree bark as a backdrop. If you'll look at that leaf, that's the leaf of the white oak. Now, you notice that it's a multi-lobed leaf, and that the lobes are rounded, and the spaces in between the lobes on this particular leaf are not extremely deep, but from area to area and from tree to tree, sometimes the space in between's a little bit deeper or not quite as deep. So but that's a leaf of a white oak tree. Now I'm gonna look around and see if I can find an acorn for this tree, but chances are I won't, because the wildlife get them about as quick as they hit the ground. All right, guys, well, unfortunately, the acorn that I found is not the freshest. Like I told you before, if there's a lot of wildlife around, they may gobble these things up just about as soon as they hit the ground. But let's take a look at this acorn, because it does have some distinguishing characteristics that'll help you identify the white oak. There again, I'm going to use this tree for a backdrop. But if you'll take a look at that acorn, this one here is probably not no good. Generally they fall out of the cap, and that's the portion on the left hand side of the acorn on the screen. But if you'll take a look, see how that acorn is somewhat elongated, sort of sticks out there out of the cap. It sort of tapers from the back to the front. That's a pretty distinguishing characteristic of the members of the white oak. So that right there is what we're looking for. If you find a bunch of them in the woods and there's sign, then that would definitely be a good place to hunt. One other thing before we move on, I think there's a more mature tree over that way. So I'm going to walk over there and see if we can't get a shot of the bark on a mature tree. Alright, so here we have a tree that is a little more mature. And you can see that the bark's not near as scaly. But if you look up into the tree, let's just pan up in there if we can. Then you can see up there that it's quite scaly. So hopefully that's enough information to where you guys can identify the white oak. Alright guys, so there's our white oak. Let's move on to a different species. Alright guys, here is the next species that we're going to discuss. This is the red oak. Now, don't discount this tree, because in my opinion the deer will eat these. I think that the white oak is a more prized food source, because the red oak acorn has a little bit more tannins in it. It's a little bit more bitter, but make no mistake, this is also a very good food source for white-tailed deer, as well as everything else that happens to run through the woods. So let's take a look at some of the characteristics of the red oak. Now guys, it's really shady out here. You've got bright spots and shady spots. This particular tree happens to be in the shade, so I hope you can see all right. If you'll take a look at that bark, you can see that it's got the cuts and fissures, but it seems like, you know, everything runs up in a line. This tree has still has some of the silver in it, but it's a darker bark. And if you look in between the crevices in the bark, you see a little bit of tan sort of showing through. Maybe down there you can sort of see that. But it's much darker. It's quite a bit tighter to the tree. It don't scale off. You can't flake it off like you can the white oak. And you know, as you look up the tree, I don't know if you can see that well, but it's sort of got vertical veining in the tree. Especially it's more noticeable on the younger part of the tree. But at any rate, that is the bark of a red oak, and this is a pretty nice old specimen right here. Let's see if we can find a leaf. All right, I think I found one that we can use as an example. This particular tree has sort of an exaggerated tip on the leaf, and I don't know if that's something that's just typical to certain types of the red oak, but at any rate, I couldn't find a green leaf. All the green leaves are still about 70 foot above me. So let's take a look at this leaf that's fallen off the tree. If you'll notice, look how deep the spaces are between the points on this leaf. And I'm going to try to get in here real close. If you'll look, see how pointed that is? That is characteristic of a red oak. White oak's not going to have those points. And it's almost got, I mean, it's almost like a little sticker on the end. It's not, but that's your red oak leaf. And so take a good look at that. I've seen them just like the white oak. From tree to tree, they'll vary a little bit. I've seen some that look quite a bit different than that, but the thing to remember is these points on the end of the leaf. It's not a maple, but it's got those little pointed hairs. It's almost like a little hair on the end of the leaf, and that's a distinguishing characteristic of a red oak. Let's see if we can find an acorn. Alright guys, we found a couple here. I want you to take a look. Now look at that acorn compared to the white oak. It's much shorter, much fatter. There's two different ones here, but they basically look the same. But now that right there is an acorn off of a red oak, and it's more globular. It's not as, it's sort of, well, you can describe it how you want to, but that's your red oak acorn. Also an excellent food source for turkey and deer and squirrels. So okay guys, there's basically your two families of the oak tree. Now we could continue to search and look through the woods, and I would find probably a variety of species. You got swamp oak, you've got chestnut oak, you've got the Spanish or the southern red oak, what I showed you. You've got northern red oak, you've got scarlet oak, you've got white oak, there's a willow oak. There's just a variety of oak trees, but most of those species are going to fall in between one of two families, either the white oak family or the red oak family. Red oak family having the pointed leaves, the white oak family having rounded lobes on the leaves. But they all have lobes on the leaves. It's a simple leaf. The white oaks being rounded, and the red oaks having the little point, sometimes even the little, looks like a little stinger or a hair all the way at the point of the lobe. But I'm going to stop the video right there, and but look into your oak trees. That is one of the primary food sources for white-tailed deer this time of year, and of course turkey and squirrel and everything. But learn those, that'll get you started. And in future videos we'll go over some other trees, some other food sources that are in the woods that will help you not only to be a better hunter, but to be a better woodsman. Until next time, this is Brian with Cliffside Outfitters. Y'all have a good day.